When I received the letter from a law firm in Ashford, I didn't think much of it at first. My uncle, Peter Grayson, had been estranged from the family for decades. I barely remembered him, except as a distant figure in faded photographs. Yet the letter stated that I was now the sole inheritor of a property called Blackpine Cabin, tucked away in the dense forests of northern Crestfall County. I remember staring at the envelope for a long while, trying to imagine what this cabin could possibly be. The thought of exploring it filled me with a mixture of excitement and dread. My life had grown monotonous. Long office hours, a cramped apartment, and no real adventures. Maybe this cabin would be the escape I didn't even know I needed. I booked a small rental car, packed a bag with survival gear, some food, and a flashlight, and set out for Crestfall. The drive alone was 6 hours, along winding roads surrounded by thick pines that seemed almost to close in on me. By the time I arrived near the edge of Blackpine Woods, dusk had settled, painting the forest in shades of gray and black. Something about the forest felt watchful. I shrugged it off as imagination and followed the map from the attorney. It led me down a narrow dirt path, overgrown with roots and moss, the kind of path that looked like it hadn't been traveled in years. My car finally gave way to the start of a trail that plunged deep into the forest. Even the air smelled different here, heavier, damp, almost charged with a kind of quiet energy. I felt a chill run down my spine, not entirely from the cold. This was going to be unlike any place I had ever seen. I parked my car near the trailhead and checked my backpack again. Water, snacks, first aid kit, flashlight, and my phone with barely any signal. There was no turning back. Every step I took along the narrow trail amplified the eerie silence of the forest. Branches scraped against each other in the wind, making noises that sounded almost like whispers. Hours passed as I trudged forward. My shoes slipped on wet roots, and the canopy above blocked much of the fading light. The map from the attorney was my only guide, though even it felt insufficient in this sea of green and brown. I wondered how my uncle had managed to maintain a cabin so far from civilization. By mid-afternoon, I caught the first glimpse of the cabin through a break in the trees. It wasn't what I had expected. No polished wood, no welcoming porch. Instead, it looked like the forest had swallowed it over time. Moss covered the roof, and the walls were streaked with dark stains, probably rainwater running through cracks, yet something about it hinted at care. Someone had been here recently. The cabin door was surprisingly heavy. I tested it with my shoulder, expecting it to collapse under pressure, but it remained firm. Inside, dust motes floated in the dim light, and every surface was covered with objects that suggested life had once moved here. Notebooks, maps, sketches of the surrounding terrain, and photographs that seemed decades old. I couldn't make sense of the photos at first. People I didn't recognize, faces half hidden behind trees, strange symbols drawn in the margins of some maps. Then I noticed that some of the images were of a man I realized must have been my uncle. His expression changed across the photos, from smiling and early pictures to increasingly gaunt and tired in the later ones. The cabin felt alive with memories. I could almost feel him here, watching me unpack my gear and explore. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift of wind through the broken window panes made me jump. But curiosity drove me onward. As I sifted through the papers, I discovered notes scribbled in jagged handwriting. Dates, times, and grid coordinates were meticulously recorded. Some mentioned "he's close" or "too near, must hide." My heart thudded. My uncle had been tracking someone, or something, in these woods. The handwriting suggested urgency, almost panic, and some pages were torn or burned at the edges. I felt like I had stepped into someone else's obsession. My imagination ran wild. Who could he have been tracking? Why go through such lengths to monitor this person? I set the notes aside and examined a gun tucked under the cot. Not my uncle's style, perhaps, but a precaution in this remote, unpredictable wilderness. Night fell quickly, the forest surrounding the cabin growing almost suffocating in its darkness. I lit the lantern, hoping the artificial light would keep the fear at bay. Every sound, an owl hooting, wind rattling branches, felt amplified. The forest was no longer just trees. It felt like eyes were following me. I tried to eat, but my appetite was gone. I set up a small cot in the corner and attempted sleep, but my thoughts kept circling the notes. Whoever my uncle had tracked, they were dangerous. Or perhaps he had been the danger. Either way, the darkness pressed in on me, and the forest outside became a blur of black shapes. Around 2 a.m. I awoke to a soft rustling outside. My heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, straining to hear. It sounded deliberate, footsteps crunching leaves, moving slowly around the cabin. I grabbed the revolver, my hands shaking, shining the flashlight outside. I caught a glimpse of a shadow darting between the trees. Whoever or whatever it wasn't making random noises. This was calculated, almost predatory. I whispered warnings, telling myself it could be a bear or a deer. But something about the movement was too precise, too deliberate. Suddenly the shadow came into full view. A man, naked, covered in dirt, his long black hair matted and wild. His eyes seemed hollow, yet intent as he circled the cabin. My pulse raced. I couldn't breathe. He paused, staring straight at me. I called out, warning him about the gun. No reaction. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then he suddenly sprinted toward the cabin, halting abruptly at the reinforced door. My mind raced. Who was this? A local lunatic? Someone from my uncle's past? I realized that whatever was happening here was beyond normal. The man began banging his head repeatedly against the cabin door. I shouted, warning him that I wasn't my uncle and that no harm would come from leaving. He didn't stop. His persistence was horrifying, the sound echoing through the woods. I tried reasoning with him, explaining my uncle's death. For a moment, the banging ceased. Then came a slow, deliberate knock at the shuttered window. My stomach sank. The figure paused outside. Through the flashlight beam, I noticed familiar features, the same intensity I'd seen in my uncle's photographs. Could it be connected? My mind spun. The forest was silent except for the soft, irregular breathing of the man. I felt trapped, helpless, and entirely alone. The sense of being watched now became suffocating. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning. Finally, faint light seeped through the trees. The figure receded into the woods, leaving only silence behind. My hands were numb, my mind racing. I gathered my belongings, too terrified to remain another night. The forest felt alive with secrets I couldn't uncover. Once I returned to civilization, I contacted the local forest rangers. I explained the strange figure and the danger I had felt. The ranger mentioned similar sightings over decades. A wild man, seen sporadically in Blackpine Woods, never harming anyone directly, but always causing fear. I realized my uncle had been involved in something far larger than either of us. The mystery remained unsolved, the danger never far from thought. Ultimately, I sold the property. The cabin, parcel by parcel, went to buyers who never asked too many questions. I couldn't risk another person entering the woods, facing what I had faced. Even now, the memory lingers. Blackpine Woods remains, dense and silent, watching, waiting. The stories of the cabin continue, whispered among locals. A place where curiosity meets fear and where some secrets are better left untouched. Mia Carter sat in the oak-paneled office of her father's attorney, her hands clenched tight around the folder of documents she'd been asked to sign. The late autumn rain tapped against the window, steady and cold, as if to underscore the weight of the moment. Across from her sat Ethan, her older brother, arms folded and expression unreadable. The lawyer droned on about assets and liabilities, numbers, bank accounts, the modest suburban house their father had left behind. But Mia's attention faltered when the attorney mentioned something strange. "A cabin," the man said, flipping a page. "A small property your father purchased 22 years ago in Siskiyou County, California, near Black Hollow Forest." Mia frowned. "Dad owned a cabin?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. Since when? Neither of them had ever heard about it. Their father, Richard Carter, had been a quiet man, a high school teacher who liked crossword puzzles and gardening. He hadn't struck them as the type to own a rustic getaway in the mountains. "There are few records," the attorney admitted, "but the deed is in his name. The cabin and the surrounding acre of land now legally belong to you both." Mia felt a tug of curiosity despite herself. Their father had never been secretive, at least not that she'd noticed. "I want to see it," she said impulsively. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "What for?" "It's probably just rotting wood in the middle of nowhere." "Maybe," Mia said softly. "But if Dad kept this from us, maybe there's a reason. Don't you want to know why?" Ethan hesitated. His practical side screamed to sell it. Forget it, move on. But something in Mia's tone, something aching with need, made him relent. "Fine," he said with a sigh. "We'll go, but we check it out once, and then we're done." A week later, the siblings were driving north through winding mountain roads. Pines crowded the edges of the road, their branches heavy with moisture. The deeper they went, the less cell service appeared on their phones. "Creepy already," Ethan muttered, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Mia gazed out the window, watching the fog rise between the trees. She couldn't explain why, but she felt drawn to this place. Her father had lived a life of routine, predictability. What had driven him to carve out a secret corner of wilderness? They stopped briefly in a small town called Bristle Creek, where a gas station attendant gave them directions. The man looked at them oddly when Mia mentioned the cabin. "You sure about that?" he asked, his weathered face creasing. "Not many folks head that way anymore." Ethan forced a chuckle. "We'll be fine. Just checking out some property." The man didn't laugh. He only shook his head and said, "Stay careful in those woods." By late afternoon, they parked at a gravel pull-off and began hiking with backpacks. The path was faint, overgrown, and the silence of the forest pressed in around them. Hours passed, and Mia's excitement gave way to unease. Finally, as dusk deepened, they saw it, the cabin. The cabin was smaller than Mia expected. Its roof sagged under moss, and the wood looked dark with age. Scratches scored the front wall in uneven patterns, like claws dragged across the surface. The single window was shuttered, and the door bore thick metal panels bolted from the inside. "Jesus," Ethan muttered. "Looks more like a bunker than a vacation spot." Mia's pulse quickened as she stepped closer. The place had a strange gravity, as if it had absorbed secrets into its walls. She reached for the door handle. It stuck at first, but then gave way with a heavy groan. The smell hit them first. Damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Mia flicked on her flashlight, its beam sweeping across the interior. The walls were covered in pinned maps, yellowed with age. Ink scrawls marked locations, dates, and notes. Some squares bore chilling messages like, "He's still out here," and "Too close." On a table lay a stack of photographs. Mia picked one up, her breath catching. It showed a man, red-haired, gaunt, with wild eyes. In earlier photos, he looked healthier, smiling even. But as the sequence continued, he deteriorated. Sunken cheeks, tangled beard, dirt covering his body. "Who the hell is this?" Ethan whispered. Mia set the photos down with trembling hands. Her father had been tracking this man. But why? In a drawer of the desk, Mia found a leather-bound journal. The first page was in her father's handwriting. "November 1999, I've seen him again. The red-haired stranger. He doesn't speak. He only circles. He's dangerous. I can't let him near the children." Mia's throat tightened. Children? She flipped through entries. They told of sightings. At the stream, near the cabin, across the ridge. Sometimes the notes described hostile behavior. Rocks thrown at the cabin. Guttural sounds in the night, attempts to break in. Other times, her father wrote of sympathy, calling the stranger a man lost to the woods. The last entry chilled her. He knows me now. He calls my name. Ethan wanted to leave immediately, but the hike back in darkness was impossible. Reluctantly, they decided to stay one night. They bolted the reinforced door and lit a lantern. The maps and photographs seemed to stare back at them, silent witnesses. Dad must have been paranoid, Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Mia curled on the cot, clutching the journal. Outside, the forest grew darker, sounds of owls and rustling leaves filling the silence. Sleep came slowly, heavy with unease. Somewhere around 2 a.m., Mia woke to a sound, a faint, steady shuffle outside the cabin. Her breath caught. She nudged Ethan awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. They both sat in silence. The sound grew clearer, slow footsteps circling the cabin. Mia's heart pounded. The journal's words echoed in her mind. He circles. He waits. Ethan grabbed a heavy flashlight and crept to the shuttered window. Carefully, he cracked it open and shone the beam outside. The light caught movement. A figure. Naked, skin pale beneath streaks of dirt, long red hair tangled around his face. He walked unsteadily but with intent. The stranger did not react to the light. He circled once, twice, then stopped before the door. A long silence. Then, knock, knock. It was gentle at first, almost polite. Ethan gripped the flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. Mia whispered, "Don't answer." The knocks grew louder. Then came a sound more disturbing. Thud. Thud, thud. Not fists, but a head slamming against the door. Mia clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle a cry. The banging stopped suddenly. Silence pressed in. Then from the other side of the door, a raspy voice croaked, "Richard." Mia froze. It was her father's name. Again louder, "Richard." Her stomach twisted. Her father had been dead for months. The stranger knew his name. Ethan shouted through the door, "He's gone! Do you hear me? He's dead!" Silence, then footsteps retreating into the forest. They could not stay another night. As dawn broke, they packed quickly. Mia tucked the journal into her bag. The forest felt wrong as they hiked back. Too quiet, too watchful. Every snap of a twig sent adrenaline racing. Hours passed, but the trail didn't look the same. "Wait," Ethan said, frowning. "We've been here already." They were going in circles. By midday, exhaustion forced them back to the clearing. The cabin loomed again, as if the forest itself had conspired to keep them there. "This is impossible," Ethan whispered. Mia stared at the cabin door, her skin prickling. The journal's last words burned in her mind. "He calls my name." They had no choice but to stay again. This time they stacked furniture against the door. Ethan clutched a fire axe he found near the woodpile. Darkness fell heavier than before. At midnight, the shuffling returned. But this time there was more than one set of footsteps. The shutters rattled violently. Pale hands scraped against the wood. Ethan shone the flashlight through a crack, only to see not one, but several figures. Each gaunt, filthy, with hair matted and wild. Not all had red hair. Some were dark, some gray. But their eyes glowed with the same feral hunger. They pressed against the cabin, whispering in hoarse, broken voices. "Richard! Richard!" With a sudden crash, one shutter tore free. A hand groped inside, reaching. Ethan swung the axe, severing fingers. The scream that followed was inhuman. The others pounded harder, the cabin shaking under the assault. Mia clung to the journal, sobbing while Ethan shouted, "We can't hold them off!" In desperation, Mia flipped open the journal, scanning for answers. Near the back, a page caught her eye. "They come for me because I know. They are not men anymore. They belong to the forest. If I die, do not stay. Burn the cabin, end it." Her father had known. The cabin wasn't a refuge, it was a lure. Ethan hacked at the door as the creatures surged inside. Mia grabbed the lantern and hurled it onto the wall of maps. Flames leapt instantly, devouring paper, wood, memories. The creatures shrieked, recoiling. "Run!" Ethan shouted, dragging Mia through the back door as fire consumed the cabin. They fled into the night, the forest glowing orange behind them. The red-haired stranger's voice echoed through the trees one last time, calling their father's name. Then it was swallowed by the roar of fire. The gravel road crunched beneath the tires as David Miller steered the van down the narrowing forest path. Branches scraped the sides, pine needles raining down across the windshield. In the back seat, Emma Collins leaned forward between the seats, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, her voice tight. Mark Harris, sitting beside David in the passenger seat, unfolded the worn map again. His fingers traced the blue line of Hollow Creek. "Yeah, it's right up ahead. The cabin should be about a mile down this trail." Sam Walker, lounging with his hood up, grinned. "Perfect. Middle of nowhere. Just the way horror movies start." Claire Bennett laughed nervously, clutching her backpack. "Don't even joke." The road bent sharply, and at last the cabin came into view, perched beside a sluggish stream, the creek reflecting the dull orange of the setting sun. It looked older than any of them expected, the wood darkened by years of rain, the porch sagging slightly. The friends unloaded their gear, the forest pressing close around them. Birds had fallen silent, leaving only the creek's gurgle and the sigh of wind. David stretched his arms. Weekend of peace and beer. Nothing creepy about this place at all. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched as the last rays of light slipped behind the trees. The front door creaked open under Mark's push, the smell of mildew wafting out. Dust hung in the air like smoke, lit by the fading glow through dirty windows. The living room was cramped, its furniture sagging with age, a moth-eaten couch, a crooked coffee table, and a stone fireplace choked with ash. A deer skull stared down from the wall above. Claire wrinkled her nose. "This is rustic." "Rustic is one word," Sam muttered. He ran his hand along a shelf stacked with brittle books. "More like haunted chic." David dropped their cooler on the counter. "It's fine. We'll sweep, air it out, and it'll feel like home." Emma stood by the window, staring out at the creek glinting in the dusk. Something about its stillness felt unnatural, as though it were holding its breath. Mark found a switch near the door and flicked it. A single bulb sputtered, then cast a weak yellow glow over the room. Shadows stretched deep into the corners, too deep for such a small space. Sam muttered, "Yeah, I'm definitely sleeping with a flashlight tonight." The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting wavering light across their faces. They sat in a circle, beer bottles scattered on the floor. David leaned forward with a grin. "All right, tradition time. Scary stories." Claire hugged a pillow to her chest. "Really? On the first night? That's the best time," David insisted. "Come on, Sam. You've got one." Sam smirked. "Fine, heard this one back in high school. They say Hollow Creek got its name because the water doesn't echo. You shout into it, nothing comes back. Legend says it swallows sound because the shadows under it belong to the dead. They mimic you, follow you, and eventually they pull you under." The fire popped, making Emma flinch. "That's ridiculous," she said, though her voice trembled. Mark raised a brow. "Then why does this creek look so still?" Silence fell. The woods outside pressed against the windows, the night black and heavy. Somewhere far away a branch snapped. Claire whispered, "That wasn't us, right?" No one answered. The next morning was pale and gray, mist rising off Hollow Creek. Emma wandered down to the water's edge, the damp earth soft under her boots. She crouched, peering into the glassy surface. Her reflection stared back, pale skin, tired eyes. But something felt wrong. The water rippled though the air was still. Her reflection's lips twitched into a faint smirk she hadn't made. Emma stumbled back, heart pounding. "Mark!" she called. He jogged over, brows knit. "What is it?" She pointed at the creek, but when Mark looked, the water showed only calm ripples, nothing more. It smiled at me, Emma whispered. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. You're just spooked from last night's stories. It's fine. But as they walked back, Emma couldn't shake the certainty. The creek had smiled. Later that afternoon, Sam explored the cabin's back room. Dust-coated shelves leaned against the wall, holding yellowed papers and glass jars filled with cloudy liquid. He pulled a drawer open. Inside lay a stack of notebooks, their covers cracked and moldy. Curious, he flipped one open. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting. Words scrawled over each other. Shadows at the creek. They don't leave. They watch. Sam frowned, flipping another page. A drawing of the creek filled the sheet, except dozens of faceless figures stood in the water, their shapes stretching toward the cabin. A faint sound rose around him, like a whisper slipping between the walls. His chest tightened. He spun. No one there. The whisper came again, soft, almost inside his ear. Leave. The notebook dropped from his hands. That night, rain pattered against the roof. Mark couldn't sleep. He sat at the window, staring into the forest beyond the porch. At first, the trees swayed in the storm, but then he noticed something. Figures standing among them, too still, too dark. Their heads tilted upward as if staring at the cabin. Mark blinked. Lightning flashed, and the yard was empty. His pulse raced. He pressed his forehead against the glass, searching. The storm's howl seemed to carry a chorus of faint voices, whispering words just out of reach. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. He turned quickly, only Claire rubbing her eyes. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. Mark glanced back out the window. The forest stood empty once more. "Yeah," he said quietly, "something like that." The rain eased by morning, but a damp chill lingered. The group gathered outside, trying to shake the unease that had crept into their stay. David suggested a hike to lighten the mood. The forest swallowed them quickly, pine needles muffling their steps. After an hour, they found themselves back at the creek, though they hadn't meant to circle. The water seemed darker, reflecting the trees like ink. Claire picked up a stone and tossed it in. Instead of splashing, it sank with barely a ripple. The sound swallowed whole. Sam muttered, "Told you. Hollow Creek doesn't echo." Mark crouched, staring into the water. His reflection looked normal, but then another shape appeared beside it. Tall, featureless, standing just behind him. He spun around. Nothing. But Emma had seen it too. Her voice was low. "We should go back." Back in the cabin, Sam returned to the notebook. He needed answers. The pages seemed to writhe with meaning now, the words more frantic. They wait by the creek. They mimic. If you look too long, they take your place. His hands trembled as he turned the page. A passage stood out, circled in black ink. "The creek is a gate. Do not let them follow you inside." Sam slammed the notebook shut, his chest tight. David noticed his pale face. "What is it?" Sam hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just some crazy ramblings." But in his mind, he couldn't shake the thought. What if the ramblings weren't crazy at all? The fire crackled again, but no one felt like telling stories. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the wind outside. Emma sat near the window, staring at the creek glowing faintly under the moon. She whispered, "It's watching us." David rolled his eyes, though his voice was tense. "It's water. That's all." Then the lights flickered, once, twice. The bulb went out. Claire screamed, fumbling for her phone flashlight. Shadows pooled thickly in the corners, darker than the absence of light should allow. Mark lit the lantern, and the glow spread, but the shadows didn't recede. They clung to the walls, stretching longer, reaching toward the group. "Tell me you're all seeing this," Sam whispered. They were. No one dared sleep. They stayed together in the living room, the lantern flickering between them. At 3 a.m. David heard it, faint footsteps circling them. Cabin, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves and snapping twigs. He motioned for silence. The group held their breath. The steps stopped. Then 3 knocks at the door, slow, heavy. Mark grabbed a poker from the fireplace, his knuckles white. Nobody opened it. The knocks came again, louder. Then a voice drifted through the door. "Let me in." It sounded like Emma, but Emma sat frozen among them, her face drained of color. By morning, they were frayed, their nerves raw. They decided they couldn't stay another night. But when they stepped outside, the forest had changed. The trail they'd driven down was gone, swallowed by trees that seemed to lean closer together. Sam dropped the notebook on the ground, pages fluttering. "We're trapped." Emma's gaze drifted to the creek, gleaming unnaturally bright under the daylight. She whispered, "It wants us there." Mark clenched his jaw. "Then we stay away from it." But even as he said it, the water seemed to shimmer, pulling their eyes toward it, inviting. Claire was the first to disappear. She had stepped outside to breathe, insisting she needed a moment alone. The others gave her space. But when minutes passed, Mark went to check. Her footsteps led to the creek. Her shoes sat abandoned on the bank, but Claire was gone. Emma screamed her name. Only the rippling water answered, and within its depths, Claire's pale face stared upward, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. Mark reached for her, but the reflection dissolved into blackness. David dragged him back. "It's not her. It's the shadow." But Emma knew the truth. The creek had taken her. The group was down to 4. Panic gnawed at them, but anger too. David raged, pacing the cabin. "We should have never come here." Sam shoved the notebook at him. "I told you, the creek is a gate. We're feeding it." Thunder rumbled, though no storm showed in the sky. The air grew heavy, pressing on their chests. Emma whispered, "If we survive, if we get out, no one will ever believe us." Mark stared at the window, where the forest seemed alive with movement. Figures swayed between the trees, dozens of them. They looked like the friends, distorted, pale versions of themselves. The last night fell like a curse. The lantern dimmed, the fire wouldn't catch, and the creek's whispers carried through the walls. One by one, the group saw their doubles. David glimpsed himself pacing outside the window, grinning. Sam saw his reflection, in the glass smirking back when he wasn't. Emma saw herself, reaching from the creek, soaked and pale. Mark gripped the poker, his eyes wild. "It wants us all." "Don't look at them!" But it was too late. The shadows seeped through the floorboards, stretching like hands. The friends screamed as the cabin filled with darkness. The storm finally broke. Wind howled, rain slammed against the cabin, and lightning lit the creek. One by one, they were dragged screaming toward the water. David vanished first, his double pulling him under. Sam fought, but his reflection held him until the creek swallowed him. Emma clawed at the mud, her cries silenced as black water filled her lungs. Mark fought hardest, swinging the poker until shadows wrapped around him like chains. He locked eyes with Emma one last time before both were pulled beneath. The water stilled. Only the creek remained, calm, endless, silent. Morning dawned quiet. The cabin stood empty, the forest peaceful. But if someone had stood at the creek, they would have seen 5 new figures in the water's reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, waiting. And if they listened closely, they would have heard the faintest whisper carried by the stream. "Come closer."